Okay, I think we're ready to get going. Welcome, everybody. It's great to be starting a new inyan in our holy chevra, where we learn together the Torahs of Rabbi Nachman. And we're taking a little departure here to go down a different path. And we'll see how it goes. And if it goes well, and people want to continue it, we'll continue it. And if not, as Breslov it'll go well. But if people don't want to, if people want to get back to Likutei Moharan, so maybe we'll make a side class of the Lost Princess, and on a separate day, and then we'll go back to Likutei Moharan in a couple weeks. But at least I want to do an intro to the Lost Princess in this class, so we can get a taste of what there is in this story, and people can decide for themselves. We'll make a vote if people want to continue with the Lost Princess or if we want to move to something else. Okay, so I just want to tell you guys that this is a very big deal for me to do a class in the Lost Princess, because the Lost Princess is something that is very, very, very special and dear to me, and it's something that is really, it's beyond words, it's beyond nature. It's something that I don't think exists anywhere else in the Torah world other than Rabbi Nachman. And there's so much amazingness to it that I'm overwhelmed with how to put everything together, all the thoughts in my head together, and how to get it out in an organized way. But we're going to try our best. And in this whole section, which is going to be an introduction to the Lost Princess and to the Sipurei Maisius, the stories of Rabbi Nachman in general, we're going to learn some ideas about Rabbi Nachman. We're going to talk about the concept of stories, and just something about the amazing nature of what we're about to get into here. I want to just tell you a little tiny personal anecdote before we get going on this. Because as anybody who knows me knows that I wasn't born a Breslover. And not only that, but throughout my religious life, I was very, very much not into chassidus, and certainly not into Breslov chassidus. And so I was not connected to this type of Torah at all. And there's a few things that Rabbi Nachman did for me that really woke me up. And I want to tell you something amazing that happened to me with the Lost Princess. So, I didn't know anything about the Sipurei Maisius, the stories of Rabbi Nachman. I didn't know what they were. I didn't know, literally zero. I saw that there's something, the Rabbi Nachman stories, right? And so, one day, I had started learning some other types of deeper Torah, and one day some guy came to my door, as such people are noyeg to do. He came to my door, a beautiful person, a friend of mine, and he's a Breslover, and he says, "Hey, I have some books for you." He asked for a donation and gave me some books, and one of them was the stories of Rabbi Nachman. So, whatever, I kept it in the house for a while. And then, a few months later, my kids were little at this time. So we always would read to my children in the nighttime before they go to sleep to put them to bed. And so, one night I said with my son, you know what? Let's read a story about Rabbi Nachman. Let's read a story about Rabbi Nachman. So I went to get this book, Rabbi Nachman Stories, because, who doesn't like to hear a story about Tzaddikim and what they do? Like stories about the Baal Shem Tov and stories about the Lubavitcher Rebbe, right? That's what I thought the stories of Rabbi Nachman were. So I opened up the book and started reading this story, The Lost Princess. And as we're going to see, the story of the Lost Princess is not a story about Rabbi Nachman. None of the stories of Rabbi Nachman are. It's a fable, like a classic style fable about, a king and a princess and a journey and all these. And so I started reading this to my son, and I read through the whole story with my son. He was a little pisher at the time. And so finished with the story and put him to bed. And I came downstairs and I said to my wife, I was like, I just read this story of Rabbi Nachman's story, and it's like a fable. It's like a simple story, like a simple fable, a children's fable. And I didn't expect this, I said to her. Then I said to her, but I don't know how to explain this, but I feel like this story did something to my soul. I had no clue about what it was. I had no clue about anything to do with the stories of Rabbi Nachman. And I had no expectations. No nothing. And the very first time I read this story, I never learned any Breslov Torah before, no nothing. I said right away, I said, I feel like something's happened to me. I feel like this has done something to my soul. And be'emes, this is really exactly what Rabbi Nachman was intending when he wrote these stories. I have another friend, a nice person. He's very learned. He knows a lot of Kabbalah, a holy person. He had a similar experience that he one Shabbos, Friday night, he thought at the Shabbos table, I'm going to read a story to my kids at the Shabbos table. This person is a very Hasidic person, like a traditionally Hasidic person. And so anyway, he starts reading the story of the Lost Princess at the Shabbos table to his family. And as he's reading the story at the Shabbos table, he starts weeping as he's reading the story. And I can't tell you the amount of times that I've been reading The Lost Princess, listening to shiurim about The Lost Princess, and I find myself so often in tears with The Lost Princess. It's something that touches the soul so deeply. And many people have this experience by reading a children's fable, right? You don't get this from reading Mother Goose, right? What's going on here? What's the story? So let's begin by talking about the concept of stories and what they mean to us, what they're there for. So in the course of trying to understand this, I have 3 stories to tell about stories. One is a famous story from the Baal Shem Tov. One is a story about the Baal Shem Tov and one of his students, and one is about another student of the Baal Shem Tov and the Baal Shem Tov. The idea is here to start talking about why are we who get together to learn the deepest Torahs and who are trying to learn to get closer to Hashem and to become holy people, why are we reading children's fables? What are we doing? There's obviously something else here. So let's try and figure this out a little bit. So first of all, Rabbi Nachman started writing down and giving out his Sipurei Maisius, his stories, close to the end of his life, after he already had students and he had already, put out Likutei Moharan, right? So famously, L'chaim, Rabbi Nachman said, listen to this. Rabbi Nachman, he often talked to his students in very sharp words. And you have to know a lot about Rabbi Nachman to understand him. But he said to his students at the time, he said, I see that even after all this time, and even after all of the Torah that I've given to you, I see that it's still not working. It's still not waking you up. It's time that I have to start telling stories. And Rabbi Nachman said that the Welt, the whole world, thinks that, like I was doing with my son, that the purpose of telling stories is to put children to sleep. The purpose of telling stories is to put people to sleep. That's right. That's what we do. We go and we read a bedtime story. That's what they're called, right? Mother Goose bedtime stories. But Rabbi Nachman said, I think it's the opposite. I tell stories in order to wake people up. So, we're all asleep. Some of us are asleep for a long time. Some of us wake up a little bit. And the worst ones are the ones who think we're awake completely. If we think we're totally awake, then we're really in trouble. So, Rabbi Nachman's stories, he felt, have more power than the deepest Torahs to reach a person's heart and to reach a person's soul and to wake a person up. So there's a story, the first story we'll say over is a story from the Baal Shem Tov. By the way, just as a preface, all of the information that I'm giving over, for the most part, unless it's my own personal thoughts, are taken from many different, we have this one, we have this one, we have this one by Rabbi Kaplan, fantastic. Then we have the new one, of course, by Rabbi Klein, Rabbi Yaakov Klein, that I have available for people. There's a lot of information here, a lot of famous ideas, and then there's, of course, much of the information that I have and much of my love for this concept and the most amazing shiurim you'll find in the world are from Rabbi Moshe Weinberger. He has 42 more than an hour-long shiurim each on the story of the Lost Princess. 42. And each one is more amazing than the next. A lot of the stuff that I'm going to be bringing, I'm not going to credit him every step of the way, but a lot of the stuff that I'm bringing here comes from him. A lot of the stuff in this sefer that Rabbi Klein wrote is from Rabbi Moshe Weinberger. One of the stories we're going to tell today is in the introduction in this book. Rabbi Weinberger, I've only met him one time, but I told him, I've had this experience a couple times. You don't know me, but you're my Rebbe. He's so amazing, and his shiurim on the Lost Princess are going to be way, way better than mine. And we're going to try to get a middle ground between that and between just reading, somewhere in the middle. But anyone who has the time, please listen to the shiurim of Rabbi Moshe Weinberger on the Lost Princess, if you have a lot of time on your hands, or even if not. Anyway, this first story is from the sefer called Keser Shem Tov, which is one of the earliest collections of the Torah of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov did not write down any of his own Torah. It was written down by his students, his early students. And Keser Shem Tov is a collection of this. So there's a story brought down in there. And how many people here, with a show of hands, either virtual hands or real hands, have read any of the other stories of Rabbi Nachman? I know Alan has. Sandra, a little bit? Yeah? So there's a very famous story of Rabbi Nachman. Yeah, Leonardo? There's a very famous story of Rabbi Nachman. So I'm going to tell this story of the Baal Shem Tov, and someone can guess. I see you, Walter. If you can guess what story from Rabbi Nachman parallels this story. Okay? Because Rabbi Nachman was the Baal Shem Tov's great-grandson, and Rabbi Nachman tells a story that's almost exactly like this story, just in a different costume, let's say. The story goes like this. As many Jewish stories begin, there was a king who had a son, a prince, and he loved his son, the prince, very much. But his son, the prince, got to a certain age, and the king wanted to send his son out to see the world a little bit, to become more cultured, to become more mature, so that when he came back, he would have tanug, he would have pleasure from seeing his son, the prince, grow up into such a well-rounded, special person. And the prince wanted to give nachas to his father, so he agreed, yeah, I'll go. Let me go and see the world and become more mature and grow up intellectually, artistically, everything, right? Okay. So he sends him away. And he spends years, he's studying, and he's learning art, and he's doing all the things to become this person who's going to give tremendous nachas to his father. And as the years go by, the king stops hearing from his son. And he starts to wonder, why is my son not not reaching out to me anymore? Why is he not responding anymore? So he sends out a messenger to go and speak to the prince. And he finds the prince, and the prince has started a new life. The prince has forgotten why he went and how his father wanted him to grow and to become something special, and how he wanted to give his father that pleasure. And he started to be happy where he was. And he forgot about that. He didn't want to go back. So he told the messenger, sorry, I don't want to do that anymore. I have a life here. I'm happy here. Tell the king I'm not coming back. And the king is very distraught, of course. He loved his son so much, that's why he sent him on this trip. So he starts sending bigger people. He sends, ministers in the government. And the big, high up, like Justin Trudeau. Just kidding. That's a Canadian joke, sorry, for those of you who are not in Canada right now. He starts sending up higher ups and higher ups, more chashuva people, ministers in the government. And it doesn't matter. The higher up they get, and the more chashuv they are, the more important they are, the less interest the prince has in them. He says, listen, I told you already, I'm not interested. I have a life here. Please, just leave me alone. Leave me alone. And finally, a very, very smart minister of the king decides to go and find the prince and bring him back. And so he goes and he gets out of his ministerial garments and he puts on the clothing of that country where the prince is right now. And not only that, he starts to learn a little bit of the language of that country where the prince is in, that city where the prince is in. And so he goes and speaks to the prince, and finally the prince listens to him and comes back to see his father, the king, and is reunited with his father, the king. And the Baal Shem Tov finishes by saying, V'zeh hislabshus haTorah b'sipurei maisius. And this is the concept of the Torah being enclosed in sipurim gashmim, in actual physical stories. That concept that just took place in that story is the reason why the Torah, our Torah, is a story, is about Adam and Chava, and Cain and Hevel, and Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov and Sarah and Rivka and Leah and Rachel, and Moshe and Yetzias Mitzrayim, and all of the travels in the desert and the Meraglim and everything. It's all a story. And this story that the Baal Shem Tov told is explaining why Hashem chose to put his infinite Torah into stories. That it should be in the form of stories. Have you ever thought, until this moment, that it would be insane for any other person to think that I should take the most complicated thing in existence and put it into story form? Right? What if, the latest scientific research, they wrote in the form of a story? Who would do such a thing, right? It's mind-blowing. Our Torah is in the form of a story. That in and of itself is totally amazing. Why is it like that? Because Hashem wants to connect to us. And Hashem is showing us that there's something about a story that makes an extra deep connection to us, more so than anything else. So the Torah has to be in a story. The Torah is almost telling us that this is the way to forge a deep connection, is by putting something into a story. Right? So this is the story that the Baal Shem Tov told in this realm. Can anybody tell me which Rabbi Nachman story that is parallel to? Anybody? It's of course the what they call in English the Turkey Prince. You know that story? The son goes crazy and thinks he's a turkey. And the father, the king, brings all these amazing people, big, high-up people, to try and convince him he's not a turkey. And he finally finds this one tzaddik, a very wise person, who gets down, takes off his shirt just like the kid, goes under the table and starts clucking like a turkey. And slowly he starts to say, you're a turkey, I'm a turkey, but we could put on a shirt. And slowly but surely, you're a turkey and I'm a turkey, but we could go sit on a chair. And slowly he brings him back to realize that he's the prince and not a turkey. That's maybe the right one for our government, but but the idea is that this is what the idea is that it's taking something and coming down to the level that people are on, to teach them something that they can feel in their bones, that we can internalize. That's the concept of a story. So this is why Rabbi Nachman felt, all this amazing Torah I'm giving you, it's not quite waking you up the way it's supposed to. So I have to start telling stories, said Rabbi Nachman. And so he started. So there's another aspect of the Lost Princess and of these stories that is extra powerful. So we understand this concept, but what is it about the story, certain stories, that sometimes when we hear them, they mamish reach into our heart and grab a hold of it and squeeze it? Sometimes you hear a story, and when you hear the story, you just can't help but breaking into tears, or you can't help but being completely inspired. You feel very, very powerfully about the story, right? So what is it? Why do stories like this affect us on such a level? So in order to answer this question a little bit, I'm going to tell now two more stories. Before we start learning the story, we're going to tell some more stories about stories. Okay, this first story is a fantastic story. Goes like this. So at the end of the life of the Baal Shem Tov, he knew he was not going to be around much longer. And so he gave to his various different students, as like a Yerusha, jobs that they would need to do in the world. And one would be, he'd become a Rebbe himself. One would go around, making tikkunim here and there and doing whatever holy students of the Baal Shem Tov would do. One of them, we don't know what the name of this student was, but one of them, the Baal Shem Tov gave the job. His job is to go around the world, go around Europe, telling stories about the Baal Shem Tov to people. And so, the truth is that this student of the Baal Shem Tov was a little bit unhappy with his position. He was a little bit broken. He was like, other students are going to be Rebbes and they're going to be leaders of entire communities, and I got to run around telling stories. That's it. But that was the task that the Rebbe gave him, the Baal Shem Tov gave him. So that's what he did, and it wasn't a sentence. The Baal Shem Tov told him that you could this will be your parnasa. You go, people will hire you to tell stories, like a magid, right? And so this is what he did. He went around telling stories about him, and he was an expert, and he was very good, and people really, really liked him, and he was relatively in demand. And so it happened that he got an invite from a certain gvir, certain wealthy Jew, from another city, and the invite was, please come, spend Shabbos with us, and you'll tell us stories over the Shabbos. And so he says, okay, that's my job. That's what I was appointed to do. And he says, don't worry, I'm a wealthy person, I'll pay you nicely. Very good, happily. So he comes, and he goes he has a very nice welcome by this community and by this wealthy person. And it comes the Friday night, they daven in the shul, they come back to have the Suda. And comes time, they just serve the fish. And it's time for the first story. And so the Gvir introduces him and gives him a very nice introduction, that he's a sought-after speaker and storyteller and inspiring speaker, as they say nowadays. So he, very good. So he gets up, he's ready to speak, like he does all the time, and his mind is blank. He cannot remember a single story about the Baal Shem Tov. And keep in mind, this was his job. He knew hundreds of stories of the Baal Shem Tov, and he told them all the time. His mind was totally blank. And he said, sorry, I don't know what's going on. Maybe it's the journey. Maybe I'm too tired. I can't, I'm totally blank. The Gvir was a sweet, nice person, a holy person. So he's a little bit disappointed, but he says, okay, you know what? Don't worry, I'm sure you're tired from the road. Let's finish the Suda, you'll go have a nice sleep, and tomorrow you'll tell us stories, no problem. So, Baruch Hashem, he's got another chance. So, they go the next morning, Shacharis, beautiful, davening, singing, everyone is happy and excited, and they sit down to the lunchtime Suda, and he's ready to tell over the stories once again, big introduction, and he gets up ready to go, finally. And his mind is blank. Once again, he cannot remember a single story. So, comes time for Shalosh Shudas. And the third meal of Shabbos. The holiest meal of Shabbos. The third meal of Shabbos. And he's getting ready and he's like, okay, this is my last chance, literally. And this is my job. I tell these stories all the time. So he gets up, he gets ready to go, and finally, totally blank. Nothing. He cannot remember a single story. And he's mamash very, very embarrassed. By this time he can see that the Gvir who hired him is also embarrassed and is a little bit unhappy. And so he just, goes to get his things and gets ready to leave after Shabbos. And as he's going and walking to the wagon, he goes to apologize to the Gvir and he says, listen, I'm so sorry. I really didn't, I don't know what's happening. I'm so sorry, and you don't have to pay me, of course. Don't pay me. I'm just going to go back now, and I apologize. And the Gvir says, okay, what can I do? I understand. And he says, I'll give you a little bit of money anyway, on your way, and you can go. So he starts walking to the carriage, and then he takes a few steps back, and he says, you know what? I still don't want any money from you. But I just remembered one story. One story just came to my mind. Let me tell you the story, how it happened. It was one time, we were all together, the students of the Baal Shem Tov and the Baal Shem Tov. We were together doing what holy people do. And it happened to be that night was December 25th. And everyone knows that in those times, December 25th was a dangerous time to be out. And Jews stayed indoors. In fact, we have a minhag nowadays, this is aside from the story, by the way. We have a minhag nowadays, from then until now, called Dittelnacht. There's a strong custom amongst the Jewish people to not learn Torah on the night of December 25th. And one of the reasons, there's many reasons, but one of the reasons is because of this very reason, that it was so dangerous for Jews on that night, because the Cossacks and all those people would go into their churches, and they would get all riled up, and come out, and if they found Jews in the street, they would be ready to pounce. And it was dangerous. So there was like a custom developed that Jews stay home on that night. We don't go to learn Torah. Until today, this custom exists. So anyway, back to the story. So they were all learning together inside. Baal Shem Tov says, as is the custom of Tzaddikim, in the middle of nowhere, for apparently no reason, the Baal Shem Tov gets up and says, we have to go right to the middle of the town square right now. And everyone says, oh, come on, Rebbe, not tonight. And he says, no, we have to go. We're going to go to the specific house right by the town square, and we're going to daven Ma'ariv there. And he gets up and starts walking. And so all the students are like, okay, I guess that's what the Rebbe wants. Okay. So they follow him, they walk through the town, there's torches everywhere, it's a big day, there's a big town square with a stage set up, and they're trying not to be seen as they go, and they get into this house that belonged to a non-Jew, and they go in, and they daven Ma'ariv, and then they sit down. And Baal Shem Tov looks at one of his students and says, okay, I need you to go to the town square. I need you to go up on the stage, and there's a special guest for tonight's festivities, the Archbishop of the entire area. I need you to go right up to the Archbishop and say to him that Rabbi Yisrael ben Eliezer, the Baal Shem Tov, wants to speak with you. Please come with me. So the student says, Rabbi, please, anything but that. Don't make me go out into the middle of the town square tonight. The Rebbe says, no. I'm telling you, you're going to be safe. You have to go. So he reluctantly gets himself together, walks out there, dressed fully like a Jew. Everyone's looking at him like he's crazy and sneering at him. He gets to the stage, he sees the Archbishop, and he goes over to him and he says exactly this. Rabbi Yisrael ben Eliezer, the Baal Shem Tov, wants to speak with you. So the guy looks at him and he says, tell him I'm not interested in speaking with him. I'm not coming. So he says, okay. He's not. What is he going to do? Start fighting the Archbishop in the middle of the town square? So he goes back to the house, and he says exactly what happened. The Baal Shem Tov says, I want you to go back and say to him that the Baal Shem Tov wants to speak to you, and if you don't come, he's going to come out and get you. So he walks back to the town square and says that exact thing to him. So the Archbishop looks at him and says, okay, fine. But the hat and everything. And so the two of them walk off the stage and walk to this house. And the Archbishop comes in, and the Baal Shem Tov and this Archbishop go into the back room and close the door. And for hours, they hear talking, and they hear yelling, and they hear weeping. And a few hours later, the Baal Shem Tov and the Archbishop come out, but the Archbishop is dressed like a Jew. And he goes out the door and leaves. And everybody looks at the Baal Shem Tov and says, what just happened? What just happened? And the Baal Shem Tov says, oh, what you didn't know when I got up in the middle of our meeting and said we have to come here is that I became aware of a very holy neshama, a very holy soul, a holy Jew that had gone way off the derech, that left Judaism and converted to Christianity, and he rose up in the ranks and became the Archbishop. And I realized that now is a special time that there can be a very big tikkun for his soul, for his neshama, a very good reparation for his soul. And so I came and I spoke with him, and we washed out his soul, like Rabbi Shlomo Karabach would say. The Rebbe was able to wash out his soul of all the tumah. And so the storyteller is telling the story to this guy, right? The guy who hired him. He's telling the story to the guy, and he sees that as he's finishing the story, the guy's face is white and tears are streaming down his face. And he says, what's going on? I know it's a good story, but it's not that good. And the guy says, that's my story. I'm the Archbishop. I was the Archbishop. I was that guy in that room. And he says, what you don't know is that when that happened, I asked the Baal Shem Tov, I was like, what did I do? I ruined my whole life. I ruined my soul. How do I do tshuva, Rebbe? And the Baal Shem Tov told him a few things he has to do, but one of them is he has to leave here. He has to go into exile from this land where he was from and go to another place. And so he said, how, that's it, forever? I'm just going to be in exile somewhere? How do I know when I've done tshuva? How do I know that Hashem has accepted my tshuva? And the Baal Shem Tov said to him, you'll know that your tshuva is complete and that Hashem accepted your tshuva when someone tells you your own story to your face. And the Baal Shem Tov knew this whole thing. That's why he made this guy the storyteller. And this former archbishop, this holy Jew, he, as a wealthy person, he would hire people all the time to come and tell stories. Because he's waiting, when am I going to hear my story told to my face? So as soon as he heard that this was his story being told, he was blown open. And his heart was full. And he was connected on the deepest level when he heard his own story being told. So this is really the power that Tzaddikim have in their stories, is that they're able to tell us a story. And when we recognize that that story is me, that story that you just told is happening to me. This is my life. The story that you're telling is my life, is all my existence. It's the deepest parts of my soul, is the story you're telling. That's the story that wakes us up. That's when we hear something and it reaches something inside us that cannot be reached in any other way. Because he's telling our story, right? So that's why, by the way, Rabbi Yaakov Klein called his book The Story of Our Lives. Because the story of the Lost Princess, as we're going to see, is our story on a very, very amazing, deep level. So one more story about telling stories that are a person's own story. Another beautiful story. So this is a story about one of the earliest, I think it's the first Hasidic sefer ever printed. It's called the Toldos Yaakov Yosef. In the Chassidish world, it's just referred to as the Toldos. But he was Rabbi Yaakov Yosef of Polonoi. And so, interestingly, he was somebody who, in his early life, was an opponent of Chassidim and came from that background. Similar, by the way, to Reb Nosson of Breslov. Very huge Talmud Chacham, both of them, but I'm talking about the Toldos now. Huge Talmud Chacham, and he was the Rav of a city. Very, very big time. He knew everything. Very well respected in the non-Hasidic world, right? So one day, he was known to be very sharp. Sharp, like in a bit of a abrasive kind of way. Very to the point, very sharp, very old European, say it as it is, right? This was the Toldos. So he comes to shul one morning, and every morning he comes to shul, and everybody comes to daven in the city, and they have minyan like normal in a normal place, and there's a gabbai, shamish, who helps him, who's like his assistant. So he comes in the shul this one morning, and he's waiting, and it's just him and the shamish, and nobody else is there. So he says, "Where is everybody? What's going on? Is something happening that I don't know about? What's the story?" So sorry, guys. Okay, he's in the shul, and nobody shows up, right? And so he says to the shamish, "Where is everybody? What's happening?" So the shamish says, "There's some Jew in the middle of the town square telling stories, and everybody's listening to him." So the Toldos is furious. There's some Jew telling stories in the town square so people aren't coming to shul? What's wrong with these people? That would be like nowadays if there's no one in the shul and someone says, they're all, someone set up a TV screen outside, they're watching Netflix. What? It's time for shul. It was probably much worse actually back then with the Baal Shem Tov. But unfortunately, I don't think we'd be so surprised nowadays. But anyway, so he's furious. So he says to the shamish, go back to the town square and tell them to stop it and come to shul. What are you doing? So the shamish goes to the town square, and the Toldos is waiting, and the shamish doesn't come back. Shamish got chapped by the storyteller also. He's standing there listening to the story. He can't stop himself. So the Toldos Yaakov Yosef of Polonai, the great rabbi himself, decides he's going to walk to the town square and he's going to get all his people to come back and daven and minyan like they're supposed to be doing. And he goes and he starts listening to the story, and he wants to tell him to come, but he wants to hear, so he can make fun of the guy and tell everybody how ridiculous it is what they're doing. And what happened is that the Toldos Yaakov Yosef of Polonai listened to the Baal Shem Tov telling stories, and from that moment on, he never left the side of the Baal Shem Tov. Never. What was the story that the Baal Shem Tov told that the Toldos Yaakov Yosef heard and never left the side of the Baal Shem Tov? What was the story that the Baal Shem Tov told that the Toldos Yaakov Yosef heard and never left the side of the Baal Shem Tov? The story that the Baal Shem Tov told was that there was, in a shul, in a small town, there was a poor, simple Jew who, didn't dress very nicely because he had a job in manual labor. And he didn't know a lot of Torah. He didn't really know how to daven so well. But he would come to shul every day, and he would say whatever kind of prayers he could say. And that's what he did. That was his avodah. And he was a simple, happy person. And there was another family in the town, and their daughter married, wealthy families. The daughter married a wealthy young man, and he came to live with his father-in-law and his new wife, and they were very well-to-do, and this person was very smart. He was a Talmud Chacham, and he would come to shul, and he would come early, he would stay late, and he would say all the prayers very nicely with good intentions, and he would right after he finished, he would start studying Gemara, Be'iyun, very in-depth, for many hours, because this is the type of person that he was. And so it happened that one time, the two of them, the simple Jew, he had to leave very quickly right away because he had to work to put food on the table for his family. But it happened to be that one time they were leaving together, they were walking together. And the simple Jew said to him, "Oi," he gave a krechts, a Yiddish krechts. "Oi," he said, "Oi, I wish that I could daven better. I wish that I could learn better. I wish that I could serve Hashem better." And the other Jew looked down at this simple Jew, the guy who was a big learner and a big Talmud Chacham. He looked at this simple Jew, and he gave a little smile. Like, "You're not even close to me. You're not even close to on my level," was what that smirk said. And so, that was the situation. Many years later, the two of them happened to pass away on the same day. And they both go up to the Beis Din Shalmala, the heavenly court up above. And they're standing in front of the court, the two of them. And the judgment comes down. You, Mr. Well-to-do Talmud Chacham guy, you have to go to Gehenna. Your soul needs to be cleaned up a little bit. And you, simple Jew, laborer, you get to go straight into Gan Eden. Straight into Gan Eden. And so, the Talmud Chacham makes a big protest. "What are you talking about? How could it be that he is going to Gan Eden and I have to go to Gehenna to get my soul washed out? I'm the one who davened for hours every day. I'm the one who learned Gemara Be'iyun every day. I'm the one who did all the avodas Hashem. How could it be that I have to go to Gehenna and he gets to go to Gan Eden? It doesn't make sense. So the Malachim showed him the scales. That's the heavenly scales. And he looked, and they showed him his own judgment. And on one edge, one side of the scale, was all of that davening he did, and all of the Torah that he learned. And it was a lot. It was very, very big, and it weighed the scale down tremendously. And he said, so what's the problem? And the Malach said to him, but on the other side of the scale, weighing all that stuff down, is that smirk when you look down on the other Jew. You look down on his avodah, and you thought you were so much better than him. That smirk takes away all of those mitzvahs that you did. And then he looks at the scales of the simple Jew. And the simple Jew doesn't have a lot in the Torah and mitzvah side. He wasn't able to daven so well. He didn't have time to learn. And so there wasn't much there. But there was something on top of it that weighed it all the way down to the bottom. And that was the krechts, the sigh that he made when he said, I wish I could be better. I wish I could daven more. I wish I could learn better. I wish I could be closer to Hashem. So this story grabbed the Toldos Yaakov Yosef of Polonai, because this was his story. He was the fiery Talmud Chacham. He was the one with the ego. He was the one who thought he was better than everybody else. And the Baal Shem Tov told him his story right when he came. And that story instantly woke him up and washed him out. And from that moment, the Toldos Yaakov Yosef never left the side of the Baal Shem Tov. Okay, so we just had 2 or 3 minias in a row trying to stop us from recording these beautiful ideas from the Holy Torah of Rabbi Nachman and of the Baal Shem Tov. But we got these 2 stories. What did the Toldos Yaakov Yosef hear that made him never leave the side of the Baal Shem Tov again? The Baal Shem Tov told him his story to his face. He heard his own existence in that story. He heard his life in that story. The Baal Shem Tov was able to speak to him and wash out his soul with that story, and wake him up and get him on track to avodas Hashem with that story. So this is the power that the Tzaddikim have to be able to give us such stories. That they're telling us about our lives, and our souls recognize that. We relate to it, and we can hear our own existence in that. We can hear our struggles. We can hear our emotions. We can hear our hopes and our dreams and everything about ourselves in these stories. There's 2 aspects, really. The first aspect is that it reminds us, in a certain sense, that our lives are really a sipur maaseh. Our lives are a Chassidic story. Everything in our life is miraculous. Everything we encounter in the world is miraculous. Hashgacha pratis, Hashem is lining things up, and miraculous things are happening to us. We live one of these stories. And when we hear a story from Tzaddikim about it, we're seeing, oh, yeah, that's us. That's me. This wakes us up and reminds us, don't think that life is just a robotic existence where things are happenstance and coincidental, and we're just making money and paying for things and trying to exist, and everything's just one day after the next, killing time, getting through one day, hardly working hardly, working hard or hardly working, rat race. The stories wake us up and remind us, no, that's not what it's about. They wake us up to a deeper existence, a deeper soul level existence. And they wake us up to Avodas Hashem. That we got to remember not to get caught in the rat race, not to get caught in the robotic existence of day-to-day life. We're going to speak a lot about this as we get on to the next few shiurim afterwards. It's amazing concepts. But this is the main idea of why we tell stories, why the Tzaddikim tell stories, why Rabbi Nachman felt that he has to tell stories in order to wake us up. This is what's going to do it. So I think we'll end it here with those 3 stories about how stories are really our stories. And we'll continue next week to start with the very beginning, the first few words of the Lost Princess, and we'll discuss those first few words and a little bit about what the Lost Princess is. And I look very, very forward to being together with you all next week, and getting deeper into this beautiful, beautiful Indian over here that is so important to me. Okay, I love you all. Bye bye.